You know the story of Eden. But what if I told you it might never have existed on Earth as we imagine? That the garden described in Genesis isn't just a place with trees and rivers, but a lost key to a sacred state of consciousness, hidden by traditional religion. Since childhood, you've heard about Adam, Eve, and the serpent. But have you ever wondered why no one has ever found this garden in the physical world? What, in fact, are we trying to locate a geographic space or a forgotten spiritual realm? What you're about to discover may surprise you. Behind the ancient words of the Bible lies a riddle as profound as it is forbidden. Was Eden a divine symbol, a heavenly dimension accessible only to the pure of heart? Or did it truly exist in this world before being erased from history like other mysteries of creation? And why does this matter so much to you today? This doubt resonates in the hearts of those who feel there's something hidden. Something that doctrines have chosen to silence. Because not everything in the Bible is taught in churches. And it's precisely this silence that pushes us toward the unknown. Eden, physical or spiritual, represents more than a beginning. It reflects our divine origins and the disconnect we've experienced ever since. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling that we've lost something sacred, but don't know what or where to look. Stay with me until the end, because as we delve into this mystery, we'll cross the boundaries between the visible and the invisible. We'll revisit banned texts, forgotten symbols, and interpretations once considered heresy. But maybe, just maybe, they're the fragment of truth you've always sought. And while the ancients tried to locate Eden with compasses and maps, perhaps the real question is, did Eden ever leave? Or did we fall from here? Because now we enter where the eyes cannot. And if, for a moment, you felt that this quest is also yours, if, at some point something inside you whispered that Eden was never just a place, but a sacred memory that still pulses, then you are part of this calling. And I want to hear from you. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. What do you feel when you consider the possibility that paradise is closer to the spirit than to the earth? Your voice can light a flame for other seekers who, like you, also sense there is something beyond what has been told. And if this journey into the invisible has awakened something in you, take the opportunity to like the video. It's a simple gesture, but one that carries enormous power. It helps this content reach others who need these hidden truths. And of course, subscribe to the channel, not only so you don't miss the next chapters of this divine investigation, but because your presence here strengthens an entire community determined to delve into the mysteries of creation. Your participation is what keeps this space alive. It is what allows us to continue uncovering what has been hidden for centuries. Now, get ready, because what comes next will shake up everything you thought you knew even further. Physical or spiritual, geographical location or divine dimension. For centuries, this question echoed within the walls of theology like a forbidden whisper. Not because there was a lack of clues, but because the answer could shake the foundations of what we've been taught is unquestionable. The Garden of Eden, that name that carries the promise of purity, harmony, and communion with the divine, perhaps never was where we imagined. And it is precisely this shift between the visible and the invisible that compels us to look more closely and courageously. When religious tradition insists on locating Eden between four ancient rivers, delimiting its borders in the land of Mesopotamia, something doesn't add up. Why have no concrete remains ever been found? Maps fail, even guided by such precise biblical descriptions. Perhaps because the error lies in the question itself. Because perhaps, and this is where everything begins to change. Eden doesn't belong to this world as we think. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the location of Eden goes beyond archaeological curiosity. It's about reconnecting the dots between divine creation and human consciousness. In ancient manuscripts that were discarded, censored, or labeled as heresies such as the books of Enoch, Jubilees, and Gnostic texts, we find clues that the garden was more than a space. It was a state of existence, a spiritual center where heaven and earth touched, where humankind dwelled before the fall of its true nature. Imagine this, a place where language was not needed to communicate with the divine, where the separation between spirit and matter did not yet exist. Eden would then be a reflection of the creative mind, an expression of perfect harmony, broken only when we choose the path of duality. This interpretation changes everything because it invites us to see Eden not as a place lost in time, but as a forgotten frequency within ourselves. And if so, the garden is a plane of spiritual consciousness, then the expulsion of Adam and Eve ceases to be merely a punishment and becomes a metaphor for a vibrational fall from the loss of unity with the divine to the experience of separation, pain, and the illusion of control. We're not just talking about theology, but about mentality, about profound transformation. Eden ceases to be geographical and becomes psychological, energetic, and existential. But of course, this isn't the only view. Some traditions maintain that Eden was, indeed, a physical place, but an interdimensional one, a meeting point between realms, a kind of spiritual portal inserted into the earthly plane, accessible only in elevated states of purity or through the intermediary of celestial beings. This hypothesis gains strength when we realize that the garden is described as guarded by cherubim and flaming sword symbols that point to something more than simple territorial protection. We're talking about layers of reality coexisting, dimensions, a backstage of creation that operates beyond ordinary human perception. And that's where things get even more intriguing. Because if Eden was a spiritual outpost, then it may not be lost, just hidden, sealed, protected from us or by ourselves. Perhaps the true exile was internal, and the path back lies less in maps and more in the decisions we make, the consciousness we choose to nurture, and how we interpret the revelations left to us. All of this points to a hidden truth that few have the courage to explore. Eden, whatever it may be, carries an ancestral coda divine memory that still pulses somewhere within our essence. And while most seek this paradise in the excavations of history, perhaps the most attentive begin to perceive it. In the silence of the soul. Comment here, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The world's best-known sacred text, Genesis, describes the contours of Eden with uncanny geographical precision. It states that from the garden flowed a river that divided into four: the Pison, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. A narrative that immediately suggests a physical, mappable, palpable place. Could Eden, then, be a real garden located somewhere within the present-day territories of the Middle East? If so, why have we never found it? Why, despite centuries of archaeological investigation, has no concrete evidence emerged? This apparent geographical clarity raises more questions than it answers. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers do exist, but the other two, Pison and Gihon, remain mysteries. Some scholars have attempted to associate them with ancient rivers now extinct or hidden beneath the desert. Others, even bolder, have suggested that the narrative refers not to physical rivers but to spiritual flows, sources of primordial energy that flowed from the center of creation, the place where the divine presence directly touched the material world. This difference in interpretation completely changes our perception of the story. Imagine, for a moment, that Genesis isn't describing a place with coordinates, or rather a vibrational state, a central axis of harmony where everything flows purposefully. The four rivers could be symbols of the paths of consciousness, of the universal forces emanating from the divine. And, in this case, the border of Eden wouldn't be delimited by stones or trees, but by the level of spiritual purity of those who live there. This perspective requires a shift in mindset, moving beyond the concrete and entering the symbolic without losing reverence for the biblical text, but accepting that it may be pointing to something greater, more complex, more subtle. Interestingly, Genesis also mentions that God planted the garden in Eden, as if Eden were an even larger region, perhaps a domain. This reinforces the idea that the garden was a kind of nucleus within a larger reality, not necessarily earthly. And when we read that man was put there to cultivate and care for the garden, this sounds less like an agricultural task and more like a spiritual mission to maintain the balance between heaven and earth. Another intriguing point lies in the narrative of the expulsion. After their sin, Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden and prevented from returning. Cherubim are placed at the entrance with a flaming sword that turns in all directions. If it were merely a geographic location, why would this supernatural barrier be necessary? What kind of place requires the guard of celestial beings with symbolic weapons? This brings us back to the hypothesis that Eden is not just a lost piece of land, but a gateway, perhaps the last portal between the visible and invisible creation. And that, by losing this gateway, humanity plunged into a cycle of spiritual disconnection, which still resonates with us today. This detail of the angelic guard also has profound implications. The flaming sword spinning in all directions may represent time, the constant movement of existence, the fire of purification. In other words, the return to Eden is not only denied physically, but requires an inner journey, a journey of consciousness that transcends dogma and reaches the core of the soul. It is as if we are faced with a hidden truth veiled between the lines of Scripture, but perceptible to those who dare to look beyond the literal. This kind of reading, of course, doesn't nullify tradition, but rather expands its depth. Because Genesis, while speaking of trees and serpents, also speaks of decisions, of spiritual impact, of revelations about human and divine nature. It's a text about transformation, about the passage from a pure state to a state of fragmentation. And Eden, in this context, is not only the scene of the fall, but the symbol of what was lost and of what can be found again. Write it down. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely when we move beyond the traditional canon and turn to forgotten texts, hidden or banned by official history, that new pieces of this puzzle begin to emerge. Books like Enoch, Jubilees, and other apocryphal writings reveal a perspective that not only complements but radically transforms our understanding of Eden. In these ancient manuscripts, the garden is described not simply as a place of beauty and abundance, but as an elevated reality situated in the higher heavens, accessible only to the pure of spirit, spiritual abode before becoming an earthly habitat. Enoch, for example, one of the most enigmatic and profound texts ever written about the behind the scenes of creation, describes a journey that takes him to celestial regions where he sees the garden of righteousness. This garden is surrounded by an unfading light, filled with trees exuding wisdom and springs of living water. There, Eden is a spiritual realm, a kind of cosmic altar where the divine presence dwells. And the question that inevitably arises: why was this account, as ancient as it is inspiring, kept out of the official scriptures? The answer, perhaps, lies in the impact this kind of revelation could have, because recognizing that Eden is not Tor, never was on the physical plane, changes the way we view our own origins. We are not simply exiled from a land, but disconnected from an original spiritual state. And this disconnection, this fall in consciousness, has been the true human drama from the beginning. This is where the journey of return begins, not geographically, but internally. The Book of Jubilees, in turn, speaks of an Eden created before the formation of the visible earth, a space beyond ordinary time, reserved as an inheritance for the righteous. It was not a patch of land between rivers, but a realm established in the heavens, beyond the reach of corruption, where man would live eternally, till wrong choices separated him from this plane. These keys are there, hidden, waiting for those who have the courage to seek them without fear of what they might find. When we speak of apocryphal texts, we're not just talking about forbidden books, but about forgotten portals that preserve the memory of a broader knowledge, often suppressed by historical, theological, or institutional interests. Because accepting that Eden is a spiritual place, not just a physical one, means admitting that access to it depends not on coordinates, but on consciousness, on decisions, on transformation. And here, the impact becomes personal. Because if this garden still exists in some spiritual layer, then the separation between us and the divine is not definitive, is a choice that repeats itself daily in silence. And perhaps the real fall was not sin itself, but the loss of vision, the forgetting of the path, the rupture with a hidden truth that still pulses in some souls. This invisible Eden may be closer than we think, but it will not be found with the eyes. It will be recognized by the Spirit. This kind of reflection forces us to rethink everything: our identity, our spirituality, even our notion of destiny. Because if we set out from a spiritual place, then the return can only happen through an equally spiritual journey. It's not enough to know. We must remember. We must reactivate the sacred memory that has been muffled by centuries of noise. And here, amid fragments of Enoch and lost words from Jubilees, something begins to form. Not a map, but an echo, a call. Something that reminds us that we were made for more. That Eden was not destroyed, merely hidden until we were ready to see it again. Comment here. I'm remembering the way. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because if Eden is not just a place, but a state of frequency of creation, then we need to see it for what it truly is: a spiritual archetype, a sacred symbol encoded within the origin narrative, not only to tell us where we came from, but to remind us of what we were made of. Everything in Eden carries meaning beyond the surface. Every element, every image, every character functions as a key to access deeper dimensions of spiritual reality. Let's begin with the four waters, the rivers that spring from a single source and divide to irrigate the world. This doesn't sound like geography. It sounds like spiritual structure. 4 is the number of materiality of expansion to the four corners of the world, of the four elements, of the four seasons, of the four directions, but all originating from a single center, the source, the divine heart, the axis of creation. This image is a symbolic map of the flow of life that emanates from the sacred center and unfolds in different expressions of existence. It's not just a description of a place, it's a revelation of how spirit is distributed in matter. A reminder that everything is connected to the one dot in the center of the garden. 2 trees stand: the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life according to various mystical traditions, such as Kabbalah's the structure of existence, the ladder between heaven and earth, between the soul and the Creator. The other, the tree of knowledge, represents duality. It is choice. The division between light and shadow, between unity and separation. Eating its fruit was not just an act of disobedience, it was an existential decision. The decision to experience the world through fragmentation, to see everything as either or, rather than as a sacred whole, and then something profound is revealed. Eden was not destroyed. It was hidden within us when we exchanged the path of life for the path of the fragmented rational mind. It's as if the garden remained intact, but covered by layers of illusions we ourselves constructed. The symbolism goes beyond theology. It touches our way of living, feeling, and perceiving the world. Because even today, every day, we stand before these 2 trees. We are constantly making decisions that bring us closer to life or sink us into the illusion of separation. And so we come to the guardian, the cherub with the flaming sword that spins in all directions. At first glance, it seems like an image of violent protection. But the sword represents spiritual discernment, the clarity that separates the false from the true. And fire, since ancient times, has been a symbol of purification, of transmutation. The spinning of the sword indicates that this portal cannot be accessed in any way. The return to Eden requires more than willpower, requires transformation. Only those who are reborn in spirit, those who cross their own inner fire, pass. Through this guardian symbolism also points to something even more subtle. Eden is not inaccessible. It is protected. And there is a profound difference between these two ideas. Inaccessible means we have no way to reach it. Protected means only those who are ready can reach it. This is what many traditions call a mystery veiled by mercy. Because finding Eden without being prepared would be like touching the sun without understanding the light. The impact would be destructive. Protection is, in fact, a gesture of divine love. And all of this leads us to a hidden truth. Eden is not in the past. It is eternal. It is not a point lost in time, but a dimension of consciousness that can be accessed when we realign our essence with the source. This garden is the center of creation because it represents the place where God and humanity meets, where there is no separation, where everything vibrates in unity. This symbolic reading of Eden doesn't nullify the story. It expands it. It allows us to see beyond words, beyond literal images. It invites us to live more deeply, to seek meaning in things the world tries to reduce to the superficial. Because as long as we look at Eden as a lost place, we will continue to miss the path. But when we understand that it is a state of reconnection with the divine, then the garden will cease to be a legend and will begin to blossom within us. Comment here: I want to find this garden again. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. 'Cause despite all the spiritual symbolism surrounding the Garden of Eden, humanity has never stopped searching for it, as if it were a concrete place lost somewhere on the map. For centuries, explorers, archaeologists, and theologians have tried to locate this paradise described in Genesis. Guided by the textual clues that speak of the four rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, Gihon, and Pish. But every attempt, without exception, has encountered contradictions, gaps, and uncertainties that remain unresolved to this day. Medieval maps, such as the famous Mappa Mundi, located Eden at the eastern edge of the known world, usually at the top of the map, suggesting not only a geographic location, but also a sacred dimension east as a symbol of the birth of light, the beginning of creation. In some versions, it was drawn as a circle separated from the world of men, shrouded in clouds or walls, untouchable by those still living in the earthly state. These representations already hinted at something. Eden, even when described as a physical place, was always portrayed as unattainable. Islamic traditionalists have also attempted to draw parallels, suggesting that the garden could have been located somewhere in present-day Iraq between the lands of the great rivers. Other Islamic schools, especially Sufism, have always considered Eden a spiritual abode, a station for the soul close to the divine light, accessible only through inner purification. This directly echoes Jewish mystical visions, where Eden is called Gan Eden and divided into two levels: the lower, a kind of earthly paradise, and the upper, a heavenly abode of the righteous, accessible only after death or through elevated states of consciousness. Even among Torah scholars, some believe the garden is more of a spiritual stage than a geographic location. The Zohar, a fundamental work of Kabbalah, speaks of Eden as a level of the soul where the spirit is still connected to its primordial source. This interpretation reinforces the idea that Eden, as a symbol, resides on another layer of reality. And perhaps this is why all physical attempts to locate it have failed, because the search instruments used were faulty. Think with me, how do we find a vibrational reality with material tools? How do we access a state of consciousness with shovels, compasses, and satellites? It's like trying to touch the wind with our hands. And it's no coincidence that, despite all modern technology, Eden remains out of reach. There are accounts of ancient civilizations, such as the Babylonians and Sumerians, who spoke of sacred gardens guarded by deities, but always in mythical tones, as if they already knew these places belonged to a layer inaccessible to common perception. The obsession with finding Eden also reveals something profound about our collective psyche. This desperate search isn't just for a piece of land, but for a point of reconnection, a secure origin. It's a place where humanity's pains were absent, where time hadn't yet corroded, where the spirit was whole. And, deep down, each new theory about its location is a reflection of the desire to return to the beginning, not through geography, but through identity. But there's also a dark side to this quest. Some empires use the idea of Eden to justify conquests, explorations, and holy wars. In the name of a lost paradise, much blood was spilled. What began as a quest for purity became an instrument of control. This shows that when the true symbolic meaning of something sacred is lost, it becomes vulnerable to human manipulation. The attempt to locate Eden outside ourselves has perhaps been, from the beginning, the greatest distraction and also the most effective way to keep us away from it. And this is where the most revealing contradiction of all arises. The more we try to find Eden with our eyes, the further we distance ourselves from it with our hearts. Because this is not a journey of excavation, it is a journey of elevation. The very absence of physical evidence may be the greatest spiritual evidence. Eden remains hidden, not because it is lost, but because we are looking in the wrong place. Here, the true search begins within. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because amidst all the external searches, all the theories about rivers, maps, and coordinates, there's a line of thought that seems to go in the opposite direction, but which, deep down, may be the only one that truly leads us anywhere. It's the mystical vision, the one that suggests that the Garden of Eden was never a fixed point in space, but rather a state of consciousness, a vibrational field where humans lived in full communion with the divine, where the separation between matter and spirit did not yet exist, where perception was pure, undistorted. This idea may seem abstract at first glance, but when you begin to view Eden as consciousness rather than as a landscape, it all begins to make more sense. The fall, then, ceases to be a literal punishment and becomes a transition of reality. A shift in frequency, expulsion from the garden would, in fact, be the loss of a heightened state of spiritual lucidity, a profound oblivion. And what we call life is perhaps just an echo of this separation. Humanity, by eating the fruit of duality, entered a fragmented mode of existence. We began to see the world through the eyes of judgment, division, and either or. And it was at that precise moment that Eden ceased to be accessible, not because it disappeared, but because we became incapable of perceiving it. It's as if something had been shut off within us, a subtle internal portal that only opens when we return to silence, to truth, to essence. This viewpoint resonates deeply with ancient traditions of both East and West. Eden is the original state, primordial. Purity, the spiritual center that remains within every human being. In Vedanta, this concept approximates the idea of Satchitananda existence, consciousness, and bliss. In Christian mysticism, it is the image and likeness of God that remains veiled within us. In Sufism, it is the awakened heart, the place where the divine still dwells. And that's why so many spiritual masters say the true journey is inward. Not as a metaphor, but as a real, intimate, intense path. Eden is not a destination. It's a memory that needs to be restored. And to access it, you don't use a passport, but surrender, a deconditioning, a return to who we were before we lost ourselves in the labyrinth of the mind. The beauty of this vision lies in the fact that it returns power to consciousness. We no longer need to wait for an external miracle, a successful excavation, or an institutional revelation. The garden is silent but alive, hidden but pulsating, and it reveals itself in small glimpses, in compassion, in lucidity, in intuition, in those decisions that come from the soul and not from fear. Each choice made with truth brings us a little closer to that lost center. The theory of Eden as a state of consciousness also changes our relationship with spirituality. It challenges us to stop seeking answers in ready-made dogmas and begin cultivating a direct experience of the mystery. Because if the garden is internal, then every ritual, every reading, every prayer is only valuable if it takes us within ourselves. If it helps us break through the veils of illusion, guilt, and division. And perhaps, just perhaps, the flaming sword that guards Eden is not outside, but within our own ego, the mind that defends itself, that protects itself, that rationalizes everything, may be the cherub that prevents return. And to cross this sword is to cross fear, pride, the belief that we are separate. It is to accept that returning to Eden is more than a spiritual possibility. It is a call to transformation. Write it down. The garden begins with me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because after everything we've seen so far, from the symbolic roots of Eden to the human attempt to locate it in time and space, passing through forgotten texts and the real possibility that it is a lost consciousness, perhaps, the most important question Isun Weridin is, but why was he sealed? What, in fact, happened to hide this dimension from humanity? And what does this reveal about our own spiritual journey? Perhaps Eden was never a place to visit, but a state to remember. Something not reached with the feet, but with the soul. A vibrational space where the laws of separation do not apply, where time does not imprison us, and where divine presence is not a belief, but an experience. And perhaps it is less distant than we imagine. Perhaps it pulses silently in every gesture of genuine love, in every instant of true presence, in every flash of clarity that reconnects us with the essential dot. But if Eden was sealed, this leads us to an even deeper question. What else was hidden with it? Because the fall of man doesn't just represent an expulsion, it marks the beginning of a cycle of concealment. What if other spiritual realms were also sealed away? Dimensions where creation still vibrates at its purest frequency. Realities that today we can only access in dreams, visions, elevated states of consciousness, or in the fragments of wisdom that survive in banned texts in mystical traditions between the lines of Scripture. Eden may be just the first of many veils, a harbinger that there is much more behind the curtain of visible reality. And that changes everything, because our search for meaning, for belonging, for truth, perhaps stems from a longing for these invisible places that the soul still remembers. And the spiritual journey ceases to be a simple evolutionary journey and becomes a process of memory restoration, remembering who we were, who we still are beneath the layers, what we were taught to forget. What if there are other gardens, other portals, other sacred spaces that were sealed for the same reason? Not because the divine wanted to punish us, but because humanity, at a certain point, chose to no longer see them. This idea carries with it an invitation, a silent call. Because if something was sealed, perhaps it's time to begin unlocking it, to rediscover it, to recover the lost consciousness that connects us not only to Eden, but to the whole, to the Creator, to the truth that vibrates before words. And when you begin to realize that the expulsion wasn't just geographic, but existential, you begin to understand that the return is as well. We won't return to Eden with maps or dogmas. We'll return with decisions, with the courage to traverse our own inner labyrinths, to let go of the illusion of separation, to look within and recognize that the light never went out. It was just obscured. Eden, then, is no longer a distant memory, but a present invitation, a reminder that we can still access this place, that, despite the fall, the door has not been destroyed, only protected, waiting for those who choose to rediscover it with humility, awareness, and truth. Comment here. I am ready to remember. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is also on this journey of return, of reconnecting with what was forgotten, with what still pulses beyond what the eye can see. And that's why it makes so much sense to have you here. This channel was created precisely for this, for us to explore together the mysteries that remained between the lines of creation. And if you felt this message touched you in any way, subscribe. That way, you can continue following each new step of this journey. And tell me in the comments if you stayed until the end. Right there, this message was for me. This shows me that you are truly with me on this quest and further strengthens this community of awakened minds and hearts. And if this content connected with you, if it sparked some genuine reflection, please leave a like. It helps the video reach others who are also ready for this kind of revelation. Now there's a video right here that complements all of this. Click and stay with me there. The next piece of this puzzle is about to be revealed.